Did you know Freedom Rocks has swag? You can help stimulate the economy and show how much you like Freedom Rocks at the same time. We've got t-shirts for men and women. We've got coffee mugs and beer steins. We've got food and beverage thermoses. You can get your own Freedom Rocks swag with the show logo, as seen in the opening title of the show, right here at our Cafe Press shop. That's cafepress.com/freedomrocks.
Welcome to Freedom Rocks. My name is Mark Glogowski. I'm a libertarian. We're here this evening to talk with Chris Edes. Chris Edes is a candidate for New York State Governor. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Mark.
Last time we talked a little bit about the income taxes, actually a whole lot about income taxes, and a little bit about the guns. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I'd like to go into more detail about my economic plan. Basically, the way New York State is structured in the budget, we have way too many unfunded mandates, and we have basically 2/3 of the state budget is local aid. So the state, and they're not connected or anything, so it's not like the state will actually pay for what it tells the counties to do. Instead, it's this whole political process where the cities, try to use their political influence to get more local aid. And then the state says you have to do all these things. And the big cost drivers for the municipalities, so if we want to get at that 2/3 of the state budget and shrink it substantially, we've got to look at what's costing municipalities. And the two major cost drivers are corporate welfare and pensions. And the Republicans like to go after the pensions. The Democrats like to go after the corporate welfare, even though they do the same thing. But you really have to attack both of them because they're both unsustainable. It's from a basic economic perspective. When you have corporate welfare, you have a government favoring one business over another business. That's bad just because it distorts the market. But also, it's there's not only like the direct kind of corporate welfare, there's also kind of what I call like the shadow corporate welfare, which is whereby they get, we know the taxes are too high in New York, and so the government says, okay, you don't have to pay any taxes, or you don't have to pay any property taxes if you locate here. And then everybody else just ends up paying more taxes instead of...
So you're talking about the empire zones and the IDA special grants to local areas.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases it's so bad that in a city like 2/3 of the property is not taxed, and the other 1/3 pays basically 3 times as much taxes. And this is a problem. I'm not a big fan of taxation, but at the very least, if the taxes are too high, and we know the taxes are too high, we should make them lower. We should make them lower for everybody, and not just people that happen to know a politician. And so that's obviously, there's only so much you can tax people before it just, nobody will live there, and nobody can run a business. And so what happens is the municipalities, they raise the taxes as much as they can, and now there's a property tax cap, but you can get around that. And then they, essentially run out of money, and we hear them saying, like Mayor Richards here in the city of Rochester has raised the idea, and other people have raised the idea of having like an income tax on the city or the county level. And, that's, in my mind, objectionable, when the real problem is that the property tax model is no longer working because the burden is falling on like ever fewer people, and there's a limit to how much the taxes can be raised. And so that's not direct corporate welfare, but it's just shifting the tax burden from one place to another, and is effectively corporate welfare.
So you use this term corporate welfare a lot. Can you define it?
Well, basically, it's when the government gives money to a corporation, or in what I was just explaining, exempts them from taxes, and we're raising the taxes on everybody else, which is basically the same thing.
So if the IDA went to Batavia, say, and allowed Dick's Sportswear to come in and not pay real estate tax or income tax, that's corporate welfare.
Right.
It's also tyranny. Whenever you have the government taking from one group and giving it to another, that's tyranny. And we have it in our country a lot. Tyranny keeps popping its head up. And because the American people are desensitized to the whole concept of tyranny, we don't want to believe it exists here. But this corporate welfare you're talking about is the tax-free zones that Mario Cuomo advocating around the schools. Is that corporate welfare?
I think so, because it's based on the same thing. The government is still going to take the same amount of money, and they're just going to take it from different people. And so essentially they're redistributing the wealth. And it also has the effect, like I mentioned earlier, of distorting the market by favoring one business over another. I mean, obviously, if one business is paying taxes and the other business is not paying taxes, then the one business can charge a lower price than its competitors, and it can put its competitors out of business. Even if they're doing a better job of serving their customers, they still will not be able to get their prices as low. And I think that's a bad thing for consumers, because it should be whoever can provide a better service at a lower cost, and there shouldn't be these other factors involved whereby the government favors one business over another.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of that tax-free zone around schools would be a disaster for any municipality that has a large university there. For instance, SUNY Brockport. If they implement this tax-free zone, theoretically businesses will pop up, and those businesses will pop up in those tax-free zones to provide services that the community is already providing. That means that the students won't go to those other facilities because it's more expensive, and they're going to put people out of business. The tax-free zone is totally counterproductive, and that's tyranny at its worst, because the government doesn't care about people that are already paying taxes.
I agree. And the second big cost driver is pensions. The problem with the whole pension system is that the politicians, in order to get the support of the public sector unions, made promises that they couldn't keep. Some of these pension funds are projected with like 8%, 9% rates of return, and you can't get that in the bond market. And the only way that they could, attempt to provide these rates of return was to invest in the stock market. And, there were a few problems with the stock market, and, with the whole bailout situation and the credit crisis, and they were not able to get that rate of return. And so what we have is all of these promises that were made that we're going to pay, people X amount of money, and the money's not there. And so they may be upset on the one hand that they're not getting what they were promised, but on the other hand, let me put it this way, right?
Well, hold that thought for a minute. We're going to have to take a break. We'll be back in a minute.
Did you know high-quality versions of all episodes of Freedom Rocks are available on DVD? Each DVD contains 3 episodes for just $15. We also have specials that aren't on RCTV or YouTube. You can find links to all of our DVDs on the Freedom Rocks website, freedomrocks.cybermansoftware.com.
Okay, we're back. And you were saying?
Basically, the problem with the pensions is that unreasonable promises were made, on the one hand, you can see why people would say, well, you made this promise, you should give us the money. But on the other hand, it's bankrupting municipalities, because it just costs ever more and more and more money that they don't have, and they have to cut back on everything else to the point where, it's at least, New York isn't as bad off as some other states like California, where they basically don't have any money for anything. 10, 20 years from now, they'll just be entirely pensions, but they're still not funded adequately. And, I think, I can sympathize with people who've been made these promises, but these promises were essentially made, so that politicians could get support, for instance, in a Democratic primary. Since we're a heavily Democratic state, they go to organized labor and say, well, we'll give you this money, and then they vote for them. And that is, I think the corruption, and people had to sort of realize that that was a corrupting influence if they voted that way. And secondly, I mean, if I make an unreasonable promise, I mean, people have to be aware of that. If I'm like, I'm going to borrow $10 from you, and tomorrow I'll give you $10,000, like you would, reasonably say, well, how can you do that? What are you doing with that $10? I mean, I may have said that, but if you turn around the next day and really expect me to give you $10,000, then, that's not reasonable. And
well, we don't even have a level playing field when it comes to retirement funds, the government versus private enterprise. Because if you look what happened in 2001, 2008 downturns, everybody I know my age, not everybody, but almost everybody, lost revenue during those downturns. Their retirement funds were in jeopardy when the economy tanked, and a lot of those people lost it. Basically, they lost everything in those downturns, and they have nothing left now except Social Security. But at the same time, the governments investing in the same funds lost money too. So the government workers in retirement funds declined. My taxes, real estate taxes, went up so that I could replenish the retirement funds of the government workers. What happened to the retirement funds of all the non-government workers who were suffering from the same fate, from the same symptom in the economy? Nobody's replenishing theirs. We have this dichotomy in terms of the government workers have the benefits and everybody else supplies them. That's tyranny. There's no other definition than tyranny when you take from the poor and the working class and you give to the government with absolutely no expectation that they have to do anything for it. And so hopefully you'll have a plan to solve that problem. What's your plan?
Well, I mean, the plan is very simple. Is that we'll have to look at the losses. I mean, I think what would be fair is to say, well, how much did workers in the private sector who had similar plans lose? And just say, you know what, the people in the public sector are going to have to bear the same burden that the people in the private sector had to bear. And also going forward, we have to look at these pension plans and we have to say that these are not realistic projections. The only way that the promised pensions can be paid is to make risky investments in the stock market, and we know that that is not a wise course of action. And so what we're going to have to do, in addition to adjusting the existing plans to match so that people equally share the sacrifice, is we're going to have to say that, going forward, you're not going to get as large a pension. Like we already know that this is unsustainable. And people should go along with that. I mean, people should say, okay, we can see that this does not work. You're making me a promise that you can't keep. And, we need instead to shift to making a promise that we are able to keep based on the evidence that we have, accumulated. And so I think that's, there's going to be a lot of opposition to that. We're going to have to do our best to make a rational case that, this is the only sustainable course of action. But, we're going to have to cut the benefits. And I think it's fair when you do that along with cutting the corporate welfare. Because what you hear from, say, the situation in Wisconsin is, well, you want to, reduce our pensions, but you're giving out all this corporate welfare. And that's a valid argument. And that's why we're going to get rid of the corporate welfare too. We're going to be fair. We're going to get, both of them down. And that's, is really the major reason that costs are going out of control on the local level. And that's why the state aid is needed. There's a list of 9. There's a website out there, I can't remember what it is right now, but there's basically like 9 programs that comprise 90% of the unfunded mandates. Pensions is one of them. There's a lot of other stuff like, healthcare programs for children, which are not first on my list. There's a universal pre-K program that's one of those 9, and I think that we can cut that because studies have shown that when you offer pre-kindergarten to kids, like initially, they will learn more than kids that aren't going to school, but by the time you get to first grade, they're equal with the kids that have come in kindergarten. Like, there is no lasting educational benefit to pre-K. And it also takes the children away from their parents and allows them to be indoctrinated by the state for longer, which I think is a bad thing. So that is another program that I would cut. And I think that, that would go a long way towards reducing the costs. And like I said, these are the pensions and the pre-K program at least.
Well, the state gives the school systems a lot of revenue. And in fact, the city of Rochester one year got a bonus of another $50 million. And they said, we have problems in the city of Rochester school system, but money is not one of them. And if you look at the school system, it looks like we're spending something in the neighborhood of $32,000 to $35,000 per student from pre-K all the way through high school, and our graduation rate is pathetic. I don't even want to throw a number out there because I'm ashamed of the whole situation. Money is not an element here in the school system in terms of its poor performance. We're definitely spending the money. So what can the state do to correct this whole situation so that the $35,000 per student per year is actually going to an education as opposed to somebody's pockets?
Well, there was an interesting thing that came to my attention about a week ago, and that there is a school in New York City. It's a very good school, and unfortunately they have, and I'm not sure how they apportion their students down in New York City, but they don't have enough students. They're running low on students. And so what they're doing is saying that if you're in a neighboring school district, you can come and enroll at that school. The law in New York State is that you must pay, right? So if I live in Rochester and I had kids and I wanted to send my kids to Greece, I would have to pay them. So this school is saying...
Okay, hold it there for a minute. We have to take a break. And I'd like to refer everyone to our website, which is freedomrocks.cybermansoftware.com. Please visit it. Let us know what you think. We'll be right back.
As you may have noticed, you can watch Freedom Rocks for free on RCTV or on YouTube, but it takes money to produce good quality TV shows. You can support Freedom Rocks by shopping at our Cafe Press shop. There you can find t-shirts for men and women, tote and gym bags, coffee mugs, beer steins, food and beverage thermoses, and a bunch of other items Cafe Press offers. You can find our shop at cafepress.com/freedomrocks, all lowercase and no apostrophe.
Okay, we're back, and you were saying about the school system.
Right, and so what this school has basically said is, we don't have enough students. If you pay us a tuition, then you can move from your neighboring district and go to this school. Now, I would not implement that exactly the way they do it, because obviously, people that don't have money, like a lot of people live in the city, would be unable to take advantage of that. But I think the basic idea of, if your school isn't working out and there's another school that, doesn't have enough enrollment, then you should be able to move over. I like the idea of putting these schools, and the state aid would transfer too. And so I like the idea of putting these schools in competition with each other. There's no reason.
Isn't that like what the voucher system was supposed to do? Is put schools into competition for the students?
Right, and the voucher system applies to private schools, and that's definitely something that's worth investigating as well. There's a lot of opposition to that, And, I think there's ways that could be worked around. I think because it takes so much money to educate a student in the public schools, like you could give them half that money and they could go to any private school they wanted. And then the school district could just keep the other half and not have a student to spend it on. And I think that would diffuse the argument that you're taking money out. But I would just say, put the public schools in direct competition with each other, in competition for the state aid. We don't have to have a situation where we're giving money to a private school or to a religious school, which some people may be opposed to. The simplest and easiest way is just to allow public schools to compete for students, and the better schools will get more students and they'll get more state aid. I think as long as, the people, we can still give preference to the people that live near the school. But I think that, the big problem, the big fear that people have with the schools in competition is they think that all the good students, the schools will be selective and they'll only admit the good students. And for a private school, that's their private property and they have the right to do that. If we put the public schools in competition with each other, then we can, keep the existing system where, they don't choose which students they have. And I think that again, that allays the concerns of people that, for instance, students with developmental disabilities will all be kept in one place, and which is a valid concern. But we just have the same basic system of non-preferential admission, once local students are accounted for, and we allow the schools to compete with each other. The city of Rochester has a declining student enrollment. If the city of Rochester could get more state aid this way, they might have an incentive to have some better schools, because they could say, if we attract students from somewhere else, we get more money from the state.
The goal isn't to get more money when you're talking about school systems. The goal is to get students better educated for less money. What happened to Sigma 6 in industry? Streamlined industry dramatically. There is no such equivalent in the school system to streamline the school system to keep expenses down. In the city of Rochester, I'm going to go back to this again, $32,000 to $35,000 per student. For anywhere from $11,000 to $18,000, the city of Rochester could ship its students to the surrounding schools and save the difference. Because that's all it would cost for an out-of-school district student to go to one of these other schools. So why does the city of Rochester just consider that, shutting down the whole city of Rochester school system, since it's pathetic anyway, and shipping the students to the surrounding school districts and just let the surrounding school districts expand? In fact, the whole concept of a school district having borders, if you're going to allow students to go to whatever school they want to, there is no such thing then as a school district. The school district is whatever school you want to go to from however far you want to travel. But the government would lose all kinds of control over the busing system. How do you set up the busing system for them, for the students? If the one student in Rochester is going to Brockport and another one from Rochester is going to go to Fairport, the busing system would become unmanageable. But I still think it's consistent with what you want to do in terms of empowering the schools to compete.
Right, yeah. I think the local school districts need to still be in control of their schools, but they would, with the incentive would be to get the additional money from the state. But I don't want to get too heavily in education. Let me just wrap up where I'm going with all this.
Okay.
I think that if we can get control of pensions and get rid of the corporate welfare, we can cut the personal income tax in half. That's a very doable goal. We also have, to a lesser extent, revenue from business taxes. I'm just going straight for the personal income tax. I think we can cut that in half. I'm not a fan of taxation generally, but I think if we can do this and show people that, we can cut their taxes in half and the state can still get along fine, I think that's a good first step into making them get out of that mindset that, we need more money for everything and that makes everything better. So that's my economic plan in a nutshell. I'd also get rid of the use tax, where you're taxed on its sales tax from when you make purchases from out of state. I think that's ridiculous. And I would get rid of the cigarette tax, because that's that's social engineering, and it's also a tax on poor people, and I'm opposed to both of those things. So that's my economic plan.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank you for joining me today to talk about your upcoming campaign and your issues. I know you have a whole bunch more. You've had to show me a list the other day, so hopefully we can do this again and get into some of those other issues that you have.
I look forward to it.
Okay. Thank you. Again, this is Freedom Rocks. I would encourage you to go to our website, freedomrocks.cybermansoftware.com, and let us know what you think. Thank you.